The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill, as amended in Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now, we will begin with Government New Clause 17, with which it will be convenient to consider the other selected clauses and amendments as listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move Government New Clause 17. Minister.
I beg to move that the clause be read a second time. Apologies, Madam Deputy Speaker. Slight anomaly with my script there to start us off. But it is...
Moment to shine, Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is my pleasure to bring this bill back to the House. May I start by thanking all members who have made contributions so far and extend a special thanks to members of the Bill Committee for their detailed scrutiny, some of whom are present in the Chamber today. This Government has an ambitious plan for change, but to deliver everything we want to achieve, we must spend taxpayers' money wisely. That is why we committed in our manifesto to not tolerate fraud or waste anywhere in our public services. This bill delivers on that commitment. It is part of the biggest crackdown on fraud against the public purse in a generation. Nothing less will do, given the appalling position we inherited. Certainly.
Does his own government's assessment not tell us this will only recover 1.8% of losses?
Minister.
I hope the right honourable gentleman will forgive me that I may not have heard him, and if he wants to come back in again, I didn't catch what he said.
We're having a theatre today. Does he not recognise that his own government's assessment of the effectiveness of this bill is to recover 1.8% of losses? Tiny.
Minister.
Well, certainly the right honourable gentleman will be aware that we lose a total of £55 billion a year to fraud across the public sector. This bill will recover £1.5 billion, but is part, certainly on the DWP side of the bill, of broader measures to save £9.6 billion across the forecast period. And by the very nature of the changes that we are making with the PSFA, we are designing those to be scalable, and as they become more familiar with the work that they are undertaking, we think that they will be able to save a significant amount more. But as I was saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, with benefit fraud alone costs £7.4 billion in 2023-24. This is a major problem that is getting worse, not better. We cannot afford to ignore it, and we certainly do not accept it. Fraud against the public sector is not a victimless crime. Our public services, everyone who depends on them, and the taxpayers that fund them all suffer. And they are increasingly suffering at the hands of fraudsters who use ever more sophisticated techniques to steal money meant for the public good. The private sector has evolved and adapted its tools and tactics to respond, but as the scale of the losses that I just outlined make clear, the same cannot yet be said for the public sector. With this bill, we will put that right, with new powers, so the Public Sector Fraud Authority can investigate and deal with public sector fraud outside of the tax and social security systems, and new powers for the DWP so it can modernise its response to fraud and error in the benefits system. As my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, said at second reading, this bill is tough and it is fair. It is tough on the dodgy business people who try to defraud our public services, and it is tough on the criminal gangs and individuals who cheat the benefit system. It is fair to claimants who make genuine mistakes by helping us to spot and prevent errors earlier. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is fair for taxpayers who deserve to know that every single pound of their hard-earned money is being spent wisely and that they are supporting... Sure.
Thanks very much for giving way. The Human Rights Act was one of the best acts ever passed by a Labour government. Can the Minister assure this House that this bill in no way contravenes the secrecy part of the Human Rights Act?
I can give my honourable friend that assurance, Madam Deputy Speaker, and indeed that all of our legal obligations have been satisfied as part of the consideration of this bill. The absolutely imperative thing for myself as a Minister in the Department for Work and Pensions is that we are supporting those who need the social security safety net, not the fraudsters who pick holes in it. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to the government amendments, I certainly will.
Grateful for the Minister giving way, and one of the concerns that we have, is he's rightly pointed out, is the changing nature in way which people conduct benefit fraud. So one of the ways that people do that is to influence others in giving them the key buzzwords, the way in which to navigate the system to be able to take out of it what isn't theirs. Does he think there's a scope here in this bill, particularly with some of the new clauses, to be able to say that actually we should have a specific legislation against that to prevent people from using words, buzzwords, or teaching other people how to cheat the benefit system?
Minister.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for his intervention. He is correct that we have a problem with so-called sickfluencers, but as I think we will hear in the debate more broadly, the government does have existing powers through the Fraud Act of 2006 and the Serious Crime Act of 2007 to take action in those areas if necessary. He is right to suggest that we should be doing more, and I would encourage members of the party opposite to reflect on what they did in this space during their period in power. I have, he will be reassured to know, commissioned work within the department to look at what further we can do, but in legislative terms I do believe that we have somebody crossing the floor. Madam Deputy Speaker,
record, just in case Hansard hasn't picked that up, that was Jenny the dog, not a Member of Parliament.
I'm sure the honourable member for Torbay is grateful to you for that clarification, Madam Deputy Speaker, even if I am not, as she would always be, most welcome on this side of the House. But I hope I've reassured the honourable gentleman there that we do have the legislation required to act, but I'm very happy to give way.
He said that existing powers exist, but plainly they're not working because we know that sickfluencers are doing their deeds, and people are responding to that, particularly in the mental health sphere, where many of the claims are made. Indeed, we know that officials, or those acting on behalf of officials, are looking out for buzzwords, because if there is a buzzword in there somewhere, they can bank the case, move on to the next one. So something plainly needs to be done to stop this off. So will he look again at the opposition's new clause 8 and 21, which would ensure that sickfluencers are targeted specifically, and say what, in the government's amended terms, they would do in order to deal with this particular group that are contributing significantly to the failure identified by my right honourable friend in relation to the amount of money that we're actually able to claim back from the huge sum that is lost to fraud every year.
Minister.
So I very much agree with the honourable gentleman that more needs to be done. I think where we differ is on the need for specific legislation in that regard. Where I think that we are falling down at present is the scale of the activity that we are undertaking. At the moment, I think we could be doing significantly more, and as I said in response to the previous intervention, I have commissioned work to ensure that that happens. We do already routinely, for instance, contact social media companies asking them to take specific posts down where we think that it could enable people to commit fraud against the welfare system. Very, very happy to consider practical points, but I'm convinced, as we will discuss further in the debate, that we do have the legislative weaponry required to take the action necessary to deal with people who are encouraging people to commit fraud, both online and elsewhere. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, turning to Government Amendments 23 and 24, 39 and 40, these bring into scope the kinds of information necessary for fraud investigations and enable both the PSFA and DWP to compel certain types of special procedure material, including banking records or records of employment, in line with the policy intent. Requesting this type of information is not new for DWP and occurs under its existing powers. These amendments ensure the PSFA and DWP can compel this information to support fraud investigations, whilst ensuring that important exemptions are in place, such as those for excluded material and journalistic material. Government Amendments 30 and 31 seek to address two separate issues in respect of Clause 67. Government Amendment 30 includes a provision in the bill so that the powers granted to the PSFA under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, PACE, by Clause 7 are exempt from the application of Clause 67(5). This will ensure that the clause does not interfere with existing PACE provisions in relation to legal professional privilege, enabling the bill's PACE measures to function as intended. Government Amendment 31 removes subsection 6 in Clause 67, which currently overrides existing self-incrimination protections on the PSFA's information gathering powers and PACE powers. Madam Deputy Speaker, this allows the common law principle of the privilege against self-incrimination to apply in the usual way under the information gathering powers and ensures the proposed PACE powers align with established PACE practices. These amendments ensure Clause 67 provides essential safeguards for the PSFA powers in the bill related to the processing of information. Certainly.
Minister, for giving way. There is growing concern, I'm sure the Minister will accept, on the use of automated decision-making, AI and algorithms. So, whilst wanting to make sure that we get the best results, will the Minister be able to commit to the transparency I think that we need when it comes to AI and algorithms going into this bill to make sure that those most vulnerable in our society aren't being unfairly hit?
Minister.
So I thank the member for Maidenhead for his intervention. He will be pleased to know that I can give him that assurance and that we do comply with all of the government's required standards around the publication of such information. The Government Amendments 25 and 26 relate to Clause 9, which amends the Police Reform Act 2002 to extend the Independent Office for Police Conduct Director General's functions to include oversight of public sector fraud investigators, enabling them to consider PSFA's use of PACE powers and associated investigations. Clause 9 also enables the Minister for the Cabinet Office to issue regulations conferring functions on the Director General in relation to these investigations. Section 105 of the Police Reform Act 2002 sets out requirements for such regulations made under that Act. However, as drafted, this section only applies to regulations made by a Secretary of State. As the Cabinet Office has no Secretary of State, this section would not include the regulations which the Minister for the Cabinet Office can make under Clause 9. Government Amendment 26 corrects that technicality so that Section 105 also applies to the Minister. In addition, Government Amendment 25 simply removes reference to Part 2 of the Police Reform Act 2002 within Clause 9(1), as the bill will refer more widely to the Act than Part 2. Government Amendments 48 and 72 provide a clear legislative framework for how DWP and the PSFA will handle and transfer seized evidence to the most appropriate law enforcement agency, including the National Crime Agency or the Serious Fraud Office. These amendments will ensure that evidence is handled by the organisation best equipped to deal with the specific nature of the alleged crime, fostering interagency collaboration and reducing delays to investigations. Government Amendments 27, 28, 29, 68 and 69 clarify the maximum amount to be deducted from a debtor's bank by the PSFA and DWP via a regular direct deduction order under Clause 17 and in Schedule 5 respectively. These amendments ensure the cap is set at a percentage of what the person would reasonably be expected to receive each month, and they provide flexibility to amend this. They will ensure that any deductions are still fair and affordable and do not exceed the maximum percentage set out. Other factors, such as the ability to repay, will be considered and mean that in most cases the deduction amount will be lower than these rates. Government Amendments 75 and 76 will allow the PSFA to investigate and pursue enforcement action in respect of the offences in Sections 6 and 7 of the Fraud Act 2006. Those offences involve possessing, making and supplying articles for use in fraud against a public authority. These amendments will enable the PSFA to tackle the widest range of influencer-style offences, as we were discussing earlier, in the same way that the DWP already can, which was a matter of concern to some Bill Committee members. Government amendments New Clause 17, New Clause 19 and New Clause 20, and with this, Government amendments 32, 35, 42, 43 and 46 seek to ensure the correct application of the powers in Part 2 of the Bill to devolved benefits. In 2020, full responsibility for devolved benefits was transferred to the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government. However, DWP continues to deliver some of these benefits to claimants in Scotland under agency agreements on behalf of Scottish ministers until the Scottish Government is able to administer those benefits themselves. DWP delivers these benefits in line with how it delivers the equivalent benefits in England and Wales. The intent is that the measures within Part 2 of the Bill will apply to those devolved benefits that DWP deliver under agency agreements in line with equivalent benefits in England and Wales. Government amendments New Clauses 19 and 20 clarify that the Secretary of State can only exercise the new investigatory powers in this Bill with devolved benefits where these are administered by the Secretary of State on behalf of Scottish ministers. They also clarify that Scottish ministers' existing powers under the Social Security Administration Act 1992 are not changed by this part of the Bill. Government Amendment New Clause 17 and Government Amendments 32 and 46 ensure the existing information gathering powers contained under Sections 109AC remain unchanged by the Bill for Scottish ministers. This has resulted in some reordering and redrafting in Clause 72, where DWP's new information gathering power under this Bill is held. Government Amendment 35 clarifies the position in relation to devolved benefits in Clause 85, ensuring that the exemptions contained in new Section 109H do not impact Scottish ministers' powers under the 1992 Act. Certainly.
Presumably the Minister is quite keen to determine how much money is lost to fraud in Scotland and is, I imagine, requiring the Scottish Government to report back to the UK on its progress in clamping down on benefit fraud. But the same should apply in the rest of the country, and that, of course, is the purpose of New Clause 13, which would require an annual report on the amount of money that has been recovered through the processes the Minister has outlined. Will he accept New Clause 13, and will he assure me on the point about Scottish Government reporting of fraud?
Minister.
So I can assure him on the point with regard to the Scottish Government. However, I will resist the new clause to which he refers because I think the publication of the DWP's annual accounts will provide sufficient information in terms of our performance on fraud and error. Government Amendment 42 specifies that the functions of the independent person that can be appointed by the Secretary of State in Clause 87 does not apply to devolved benefits unless these are delivered by the Secretary of State under agency agreement. Government Amendments 60 and 67 will amend the time required for compliance with a production order served in Scotland. This is to match with normal conventions in Scotland. Government Amendment 43 ensures the new debt recovery powers taken by the Secretary of State under this bill only apply to devolved benefits, while the Secretary of State recovers devolved debts under agency agreements. Government Amendments New Clause 18 and Government Amendment 33 are consequential amendments to the Social Security Fraud Act 2001, which also ensure that the powers of Scottish ministers under the 2001 Act are unchanged by this bill. Government Amendments 36, 37 and 38 seek to clarify exemptions in the DWP information gathering powers to deliver the intended policy outcome. A key safeguard in the new DWP information gathering powers is the exclusion of personal information about users of particular types of free services, such as advocacy and advice services which offer crisis support, for example, where someone is fleeing domestic abuse. The intent of this safeguard is to ensure that nobody is deterred from seeking the support they need when they need it. However, the current drafting of this exemption in the bill as not-for-profit is too broad. This excludes certain information that is very likely to be relevant to a DWP fraud investigation. For example, it prevents the Department from compelling information from housing associations, such as an individual's address or tenancy, which can be instrumental in proving or disproving a suspicion of fraud. Sure.
Thank the Minister very much for giving way. The independent person is required to produce an annual report on how these, as the Minister has just laid out, quite extensive new powers are being used. But there's no requirement for the DWP to adopt the report's recommendations. In cases where it does not accept the recommendations, will the Government consider committing to explaining why it's reached that conclusion at least? Minister.
I would be very happy, Madam Deputy Speaker, to report to the House on the reasons why we would not do that, and I'm sure that the Honourable Lady will allow me to write to her separately to set out how I would intend us doing that, but it seems a reasonable request. But returning to my original point, Madam Deputy Speaker, the current drafting would mean that DWP can compel information of this kind from private landlords or estate agents, but not from housing associations. There is an inequity in that we are seeking to address with these amendments, clarifying the drafting and continuing to protect the personal information of service users of crisis support or advocacy services. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill also brings forward new information gathering powers that govern how DWP authorised officers can compel information to support an investigation into fraud. It also sets out where information must not be compelled, for example, to protect the long-standing principle of legal professional privilege. Separately, the bill brings forward powers of entry, search and seizure for DWP authorised investigators, those tasked with investigating the most serious cases of fraud. It does this by bringing those authorised investigators under the remit of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 in England and Wales, and by creating similar powers in Scotland for DWP authorised investigators. This ensures that DWP authorised investigators are governed by a similar legal framework to other law enforcement bodies who are granted access to use these types of powers. Government Amendment 41 seeks to ensure the exemptions to information that DWP authorised officers can compel are not applicable to authorised investigators when using powers of entry, search and seizure, and Government Amendment 45 mirrors this provision for the PSFA. These amendments will support effective fraud investigation, as without access, crucial evidence might remain out of reach, slowing down our response to fraud. These exemptions are important, but the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, which applies in England and Wales, already provides such restrictions and safeguards by only enabling this information to be compelled with the approval of the courts, coupled with similar conventions that apply for Scotland. This amendment ensures there is no duplication. The powers in this bill remain in line with existing conventions as set out in PACE and correctly reflect the norms of the Scottish legal system. I turn now to Government Amendments 61, 62, 63, 64, 65 and 66. Currently, paragraph 10 of Schedule 3ZD refers to definitions within the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 in relation to special procedure material, confidential professional material, excluded material and items subject to legal privilege. Government Amendments 63 and 51 set out specific definitions to avoid linking provisions that relate solely to Scotland with existing legislation that applies to England and Wales. It also ensures that legal privilege and items subject to legal privilege, references contained within the schedule, are correctly defined for Scotland. Government Amendments 61, 62, 64, 65 and 66 are consequential to 63. Government Amendments 47 and 48 ensure the powers for DWP under PACE taken by this bill in Schedule 4 are aligned with those of the police and other government departments such as HMRC and provide a clear legal framework for what evidence can be seized and how it should be handled. Government Amendment 47 and 48 mean that DWP authorised investigators, like the police, can seize items that are reasonably believed to be evidence of an offence, not just DWP-related offences, when undertaking entry, search and seizure activities in England and Wales. This will mean that potential evidence of any other offence, if discovered in the course of a search, can be preserved and may be seized where it is considered necessary to prevent it being destroyed or moved. They ensure the law is clear on how it must be handled and transferred to the most appropriate law enforcement agency in England and Wales. Government Amendments 49, 50 and 59 make similar provisions for authorised investigators in Scotland to those I have just described for England and Wales. Government Amendments 57 and 58 clarify how authorised investigators can prevent access to seized evidence from any offence if it may prejudice criminal proceedings in Scotland by amending the definition of offence in Schedule 3ZD inserted by Schedule 4 of this Act. This mirrors the same provisions which are already in the bill as it applies to England and Wales. Government Amendments 53, 54, 55 and 56 are all minor and technical amendments to correct inconsistencies in terminology. Government Amendment 34 is a minor and technical amendment to provide the correct reference to powers in the Social Security Administration Act 1992 to ensure that the powers in Scotland align with England and Wales. Government Amendment 52 amends the period of time in which a warrant must be exercised to Scotland from 3 months to 1 month. This corrects the bill to ensure it is consistent with the usual practice in Scotland. Government Amendment 70 ensures that the court has the power to order a person, having been disqualified, to provide their NI or EU driving licence, as is already the case for those holding a GB licence under the new debt recovery powers. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill as drafted would allow a DWP debtor who evades payment and holds an NI or EU licence to be disqualified from driving. However, it inadvertently limits the court's ability to order that person to produce their licence unless it was issued in Great Britain, undermining the power and causing administrative difficulties for the court and DVLA. Government Amendment 70 corrects this and ensures parity between GB, NI and EU driving licences under the powers in Schedule 6. Government Amendments 73, 74, 77, 78 and 79 ensure that the application and limitation period in Clause 99 follow the policy intention that the PSFA can investigate fraud and recover debt in England and Wales. Government Amendment 44 also ensures that DWP's debt recovery powers in this bill are not limited in Scotland to the usual 5-year time limits in the Prescriptions and Limitations Scotland Act 1973. This makes it clear that the longer 20-year recovery period in Scotland applies to such provisions introduced or amended by this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I have set out, the intent behind these amendments is to ensure the delivery of the intended policy intent or to ensure the correct territorial application of the bill. Sure.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and forgive me for waiting until what appears to be the end of his list, because when his honourable friend asked him about the application of the Human Rights Act in this context, he said that it didn't breach it, in effect. My advice is a little different, and I waited for his amendments to see if anything in it changed it. But my advice is that suspiciousness financial surveillance could breach Article 8, which is the right to privacy, and Article 14, prohibition of discrimination. Would he make available to the House his legal advice on this? Because I think this is incredibly important, because this is central to the major criticism of this bill.
Minister.
I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've already made clear that I'm satisfied with the advice that I have received. We will make available all of the information that we are required to, but he will appreciate that I'm not able to give an undertaking to release all legal advice at this stage. What I can say to him is that I am very confident that there is no breach in particular of Article 8. That is something that has been explored at length as we have gone through this process. Madam Deputy Speaker, I do just want to finish up by welcoming the ongoing engagement with industry and key stakeholders that we have seen with this bill. We have made a significant effort to engage all interested parties and to listen to their views. This feedback has been important in shaping our approach to this bill to date, and it will continue to be so as the bill moves to the other place. But before I finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will make some very quick remarks about non-government amendments on the DWP eligibility verification measure and the DWP debt recovery powers. Amendments 2 and 5 from the Honourable Member for Torbay would remove the eligibility verification measure entirely from the bill. I must resist this. I think we have a fundamental disagreement about the proportionality of the measure, and I think his concerns continue to be misplaced. This is something that we've explored at length at the Bill Committee. I appreciate where he is coming from and his perspective on this, but I do disagree with him. When fulfilling our duty to protect public money, we must also balance individuals' rights to privacy. These powers will include robust safeguards, reporting mechanisms and independent oversight to give confidence that they will be used fairly and effectively. Madam Deputy Speaker, The Information Commissioner himself has welcomed the changes made to previous iterations of the eligibility verification measure, which addressed many of the concerns that he had had with the previous government's DPDI bill. I must also highlight the importance of this measure from a fiscal perspective, Madam Deputy Speaker. This measure alone will save £940 million over the next 5 years and £500 million annually once fully rolled out. Similarly, Madam Deputy Speaker, Amendment 11 from my honourable friend, the member for Poole, seeks to restrict the eligibility verification power to be used only when there is a suspicion of fraud. This would undermine the measure entirely, with existing information gathering powers sufficient to deal with such cases, but we do require this power because it will enable better data sharing between the private and public sector to help check claimants are meeting the criteria for their benefit and to detect incorrect payments at an earlier stage before any suspicion of wrongdoing has arisen. It is not a power to be used to respond to suspected fraud. Information will not be shared with the DWP under the assumption that a claimant is guilty of any wrongdoing. The DWP must look into why the account has been flagged by the bank and ascertain whether an incorrect payment has been made. That is why, following receipt of the information from banks, DWP will make further inquiries to determine whether a benefit has been incorrectly paid and whether this is due to fraud or error. It would be impossible for DWP to suspect fraud before it has even established that a benefit has been incorrectly paid. Amendments 8 and 9 from my honourable friend, the member for Liverpool Wavertree, would reduce the effectiveness of the proposed debt powers within the bill. The Department can already apply to the Court for a third-party debt order, and a key reason for introducing the direct deduction order is to recover more public money without unnecessarily using the Court's time. It is also highly unlikely that debtors who have repeatedly refused to engage with the Department and repay voluntarily will suddenly agree to recovery taking place directly from their bank account. I'd also remind the House that obtaining information from banks, including relevant bank statements under this measure, is a vital safeguard to establish an affordable deduction rate where someone has refused to engage. It will also prevent further issues for a debtor than the use of courts could bring about, such as, for instance, a CCJ or court costs, and enables the Department to utilise regular as well as lump sum deduction orders. But with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will bring my comments to a close. I look forward to the debate and to responding to the contribution of colleagues in my closing remarks.
Information notices.
The question is that the Government New Clause 17 be read a second time. Shadow Minister Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I echo the comments that the Minister made about the work that the committee did. I think we had a very constructive few weeks and were able to get into some of the nitty-gritty, as it were, on this debate. I have no doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the House will agree that fraud is not acceptable. Whether it is against individuals, organisations or the state, the money being taken is not their own, and when it comes to defrauding the government, that is money that is being taken from every single taxpayer. At the same time, errors unfortunately do happen. They might be accidental by the claimant or they might be accidental by the department, but while there is no ill intention, errors can still be costly to the taxpayer, and the impact is on some of the most vulnerable people in our country. So the question then is how best to tackle fraud and error in the welfare state and the public sector. Now, while we welcome many of the principles behind this bill, and indeed, as is no doubt going to be mentioned many times this afternoon, much of it builds on the work that the Conservatives were doing before the general election last summer, but we do have concerns that it has been rushed through. On the one hand, there are gaps in the legislation where it is not tough enough. It fails to be a strong deterrent to make potential fraudsters think again and does not sufficiently safeguard the public's money. And on the other, there are parts of the bill where there has not been sufficient preparation. They are which are incredibly vague, and it is unclear what the implications will actually be for those involved or whether the benefit justifies the cost. This must also be seen in the context that even after the government's questionable welfare reforms, the sickness benefit bill is forecast to hit nearly £1 billion by the end of the decade, vastly more than we spend on defence, more than we spend on schools, and more than we spend on policing. So this is why we have tabled a number of amendments that seek to address these points. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll speak to new clauses 21 and 8 on the so-called sickfluencers. New clauses 21 and 8 seek to tackle the rise in so-called sickfluencers on social media, such as those we may be aware of on TikTok and YouTube, who post videos showing people how they might be able to make fraudulent claims for benefits, including the personal independent payment, which does not require medical evidence, but does need a self-assessment claim. Advice offered, as we have already heard, can include using specific buzzwords and providing template claims and on guidance on passing questions at the interview stage to fraudulently inflate the value of claims. Now, we do not want to target people who are providing genuine advice and guidance to people about how the welfare system and other public authorities work, but that is very different from providing assistance and encouragement to commit fraud, which is not acceptable. Now, we recognise the vital work that not-for-profit organisations such as Citizens Advice right across the country, and indeed in my own constituency of South Hams, Citizens Advice South Hams and Plymouth, and groups like Improving Lives Plymouth, who do much to support those seeking to claim what they are entitled to. However, the online sickfluencers need tackling. Now, during the committee debate, the Minister did query, as well as the fact that we were putting this amendment forward, why our new clause was only looking at a 7-year prison sentence when other similar clauses or offences had a 10-year sentence. So this new clause, these new clauses 21 and 8 have addressed this, and we've listened. So as you'll see, they also put forward a 10-year sentence to bring them in line. Yes, I will give way.
I'm grateful for the Shadow Minister giving way. And in the Government's response to my question about the sick influencers, the Government said that there's already legislation in place. If that is the case, do we know how many convictions have taken place under this legislation? Because that would make an inference on what we need to do to say whether or not the system is actually working or not. Because my suspicion is we need this piece of legislation to be able to make sure that we can actually hold people to account.
I thank my honourable friend for his question and his intervention, and I would echo his concern that we are not seeing those existing powers utilised enough, and I would ask the Minister, perhaps in his summing up, if he can give us some further information about how that is being used and reassurances that it will be used further if these new clauses are not successful today. We believe that creating a specific offence to target this type of online fraud would send the clear message to sickfluencers that what they are doing is not only morally wrong, but is also illegal. Something that is this clear provides them with no alternative than to realise that they are going to be caught. So should the Government choose to continue to oppose our amendment because they believe the powers already exist, I would be grateful if the Minister could at the very least set out how the Government will ensure that the legislation that they believe already tackles this crime is utilised to the full, particularly with regard to the DWP, because his new clause 75 and 76 refer specifically to the PSFA. So I think we're particularly keen to see how the powers can be used more fully to tackle DWP claim to be the deterrent that we want it to be. Now, I want to know that after today's debate and vote, sickfluencers are left in no doubt that the full weight of the law will be used against them as they actively defraud the state. New Clause 9 is on the powers of arrest, and whilst we also welcome measures in the bill first announced by the previous government to give DWP investigators greater powers to aid with their investigations, such as search and seizure, and there must be appropriate safeguards around that, but we do believe that this would then bring benefit fraud investigations in line with tax fraud within the HMRC. So that is very welcome. But we want to go further and address other shortfalls in the DWP powers. So new Clause 9 would add the power of arrest to the powers given to DWP investigators and resolve the seemingly illogical current position that the Government wants to give DWP investigators the power to enter and search a premises, seize, retain and dispose of material, obtain sensible material and use reasonable force, but not to arrest someone if the evidence shows that it is necessary. Now, again, during the committee highlighted that the police would be able to carry out the arrest function on behalf of the DWP should it ever be necessary. But we would question whether that is a sustainable position to hold and believe our new clause would ensure that we do not add an additional burden onto the police. This is not without precedent and would bring the DWP in line with the approach taken to serious and organised crime across government, such as at the HMRC and the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority. Our new Clause 10 on liability orders and seizure of assets is something that we are concerned about. We want to ensure that the DWP can do everything it can to recover funds fraudulently claimed, even when that money is no longer sitting in a bank account. It cannot be right that someone can use that money to buy expensive cars, flat-screen TVs, or other luxury assets which the state cannot then recover from them. So our new Clause 10, Madam Deputy Speaker, would therefore give the Secretary of State powers to apply to the courts to seize assets where someone has been found guilty of fraud and the funds not recovered in order to repay the state. In a similar vein to our Sick Fluence's new clause, we believe these additions are needed to send the strongest message to those who are knowingly defrauding the system that they will be caught and they will have to pay. Now, new Clause 10 doesn't just give powers to seize assets to the Secretary of State, it actually says she must use them too. And we've included this as the DWP have said that they already can do this, but we know that through written parliamentary questions in the last 5 years, those powers haven't been used, albeit they could make use of the Proceeds of Crime Act. So we believe that there must be an explicit expectation that assets will be seized and that we need new Clause 10 to ensure that this is achieved. I will give way.
It's great to hear that she's committed to taking tougher action against benefit fraud after 14 years of failing in office. But does she also welcome longer sentences for fraud in other areas of government, including COVID corruption, including for those Tory donors who committed the crime?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention, but I don't think that's what we're actually debating. It's certainly not part of my speech this afternoon. New clauses 11, 12 and 20 are on the impact on banks. We also have concerns about the lack of detail in the bill when it comes to the eligibility verification mechanism and the requirements that will be put on banks and other financial institutions. To date, we do not have the statutory code of conduct. We do not know what it will cost banks. We do not know the results of any pilot schemes, and we do not know whether the amount recovered will be more than what it costs to administer. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, had you been in our committee, you would have known that the code of conduct, if you word search it, was probably the most frequently commented thing, and the ministers did a huge amount to reassure us that it was forthcoming, and cheesecake as well. I didn't want to say it from the front bench, but there we have now. You will have to look back at the Hansard for the committee. I'll never look at a cheesecake in the same way. However, the code of conduct was regularly raised in committee, and we did get assurances continually from the ministers, but we still lack that detail at the moment. So we have therefore tabled a number of amendments to get clarity on these, including to require the government to publish their statutory code of conduct with the banks and information on the testing completed to date, an impact assessment on the cost implication of this bill for banks, and an amendment to allow banks to challenge the expansion of these powers if the costs that would be incurred exceed a pre-agreed amount. We know that banks and financial institutions want to help tackle fraud, but measures must be proportionate and not unduly burdensome, or it risks resources being diverted from tackling other types of financial crime to meet these requirements. We cannot simply assume that they will do what is right. We need to give them an incentive to do it too. Amendments 16, 17, 18 and 19 refer to the need for a first-tier tribunal. The bill also takes significant powers for the Secretary of State, giving them the power to review decisions that they, the Cabinet Office or the Public Sector Fraud Authority made. Amendments 16, 17, 18 and 19 change the appeal body from the Minister for the Cabinet Office to the first-tier tribunal, ensuring that there is not just independent oversight, but an effective independent channel of appeal against information notices that does not just go back to the same organisation that issued the original notice. New Clause 6, Madam Deputy Speaker, is on whistleblowing. If we are serious about cutting fraud and error, we also need to have confidence in our whistleblowing procedures for civil service staff. I have experienced firsthand at the very beginning of my career what it is like to see public sector fraud being committed, but to feel the pressure of wanting to act, but not knowing what would happen to me or indeed my career if I had done the right thing, and it's perhaps one of the biggest regrets of my life. In December 2023, the National Audit Office published a report investigating whistleblowing in the civil service, setting out what further improvement is required. Now, the election came before the Conservatives were able to act, but we hope the new government will now take forward new Clause 6 to review the whistleblowing processes in relation to public sector fraud. Elsewhere in government, Madam Deputy Speaker, new protections have been proposed for NHS whistleblowers, but that should not be the end of the government's ambition. They must have its own house in order as they come after fraud and error in the general public, and I'd at least like to hear a commitment to address the National Audit Office report. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm nearly there. New clause 14 on vulnerable customers. Throughout all of this, we must not forget to consider the impact of fraud, error and recovery on vulnerable people. In the absence of details provided to the bank about how their eligibility verification mechanism would work, we have concerns about the potential risks of debanking for vulnerable customers and those in receipts. So new clause 14 would require the Secretary of State to consider the impact of this bill on vulnerable customers' access to banking and ensure that their access to banking is protected. So I would also like to take this moment to note our support for the principles behind several of the amendments tabled by the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, the Honourable Member for Torbay, including those that consider the impact on financial exclusion and those at risk of domestic abuse. Overall, while the bill comes with the right intentions to tackle fraud and error, indeed the eye-watering sums that have already been mentioned today, we do have significant concerns that our amendments seek to address, and we hope the government will support them today. However, it is clear that even if this bill passes, it will not on its own be enough to bring fraud and error to zero, and the government must set out what further action will be taken on enforcement, on the use of AI and technology, and on social media to keep pushing and make clear to fraudsters that they will not succeed whilst protecting vulnerable people from error. If they become complacent and fail to address these issues, I fear the bill will not deliver the results that we, least of all the hard-working taxpayer whose money is being stolen, all need.
Before I call the next speaker, can I just make it clear that I will be coming to the Liberal Democrat spokesperson immediately after them. Gill German.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the return of this bill to the House. I was happy to speak on it at second reading, where I welcome this government's crackdown on fraud, because every pound lost to fraudulent claims is a pound that could be spent on vital public services. Services that my constituents in Clwyd North rely on. And the recognition and action in response to the £7.1 million of fraud and error payments in 2022 to 23 in Wales alone, up by 0.6 million since the previous year, is extremely good to see. The fine-tuning of this bill is important, and the government amendments that speak to the correct application under devolution settlements, intended policy intent, the application and limitation in Part 3, and the consequential amendments to Parent Acts that have been put forward do just that. I was glad to be a member of the Public Bill Committee who considered this bill in more detail, and I add weight to the comments made earlier about how that bill committee progressed and the way that it was so helpful to the committee members. The points made by the ministers, explanation and expansion, served us really well and bring us here today. The distinction between intentional fraud and accidental individual error is an area that I spoke on at second reading, and I'm pleased that the amendments that we've heard from the government speak to those reservations with regards to that and proportionality. Namely, crucial safeguards will be strengthened to ensure that no one is pushed into undue financial hardship because of debt recovery, including strict affordability checks on recovery payments and checks on vulnerabilities. Indeed, I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I take your point about the need for strengthening, but I wonder if this bill being brought forward before we've had the report from the independent review into the carers allowance scandal means that we're extending the powers of the DWP before we've had an opportunity to actually look at what reform is necessary to the department. Does she share that concern?
Well, this bill speaks to protecting vulnerabilities where we see them, and it is very much a bill of last resort. So it is aimed at people who are not engaging with the DWP on fraud and error cases. in a way that we hope that the carers, now they are aware of the problems that have gone on in the system, will be engaging. So I don't believe it will impact them in the way that the member sets out. Indeed, I think that the bill will protect claimants by enabling early dialogue to spot errors sooner and prevent debt building up through genuine mistakes, which was my initial reservation. It's clearer than ever that these are, as I spoke to, powers of last resort for those who have refused to engage and are able to pay. And that's a really important point to emphasise. It puts DWP powers in line with those that already exist for HMRC and the Child Maintenance Service, and in turn puts the importance of public money on equal footing. The behaviour change that comes as a wider expected benefit of this bill is also welcome. It encourages debtors to negotiate a repayment plan ahead of measures of last resort. And importantly, as has already been spoken on, it deters organised fraudsters and those looking to become involved by removing the frame of this as a victimless crime. It is indeed anything but, because it robs us all of vital money for public services. We are not willing to shrug our shoulders at this like the party opposite did at the rising tide of fraud during the COVID pandemic and beyond. We must all reinforce the narrative that benefit from is not a victimless crime, and tackling this through this bill is long overdue. I've been reassured throughout this process at the Bill Committee and here now at report stage that those who have genuine difficulty in navigating the social security system have nothing to fear from this bill. And indeed, it will raise awareness of the importance of early dialogue at an early stage. My concerns on the complexity of the system itself, which I voiced at second readings, however, and how it is administered, remain, but that was for another day. And as a member of the Work and Pension Select Committee, this is something I will continue to focus on, along with regular dialogue with my constituents on the ground. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this bill and the fine-tuning that has come about through government amendments passed at committee stage. I was pleased to serve on this as my first public bill committee, and I thank the chairs, ministers and all involved for its smooth running. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am happy to support the government amendments put to the House today.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start off by assuring the member for South West Devon that my office have talked me out of mentioning the Waitrose cheesecake that was a hot topic throughout the Bill Committee. On a very much more serious note, I would like to explore particularly the challenges that we have within this bill. Clearly, as has been said already, fraud can only be a bad thing. It robs the public purse. But we need to make sure that our approach to this is proportionate, and that is where the rub is for us as Liberal Democrats. I'd first of all like to make sure that we focus on the COVID crisis, something that many of us, well, all of us lived through, and some of us were in hot seats. I know I was actually leader of Torbay Council at the time, so it did very much feel as if you were at the eye of the storm of some of those challenges. But I'm afraid to say that for many of us within this chamber, it does feel as if the Conservatives were asleep at the wheel with the levels of fraud that we saw taking place during the pandemic. The fact that £10 billion worth of fraud occurred around PPE is shocking. 16 billion of fraud occurred around support for businesses. Whilst it is extremely important, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we supported those businesses appropriately, the safeguards were extremely limited. I had one businessman in Torbay say to me that it was as if the Chancellor of the Exchequer had got handfuls of £50 notes, filled carrier bags across the town centre and said to the criminal element, "Come and help yourselves." The reality is that this money could have and should have been put to good use. Only in my own constituency, my hospital is crying out for investment. Torbay Hospital is crying out for investment. We have the sewage scandal where we could have the Environment Agency supporting this being tackled. And then, of course, the cost of living crisis where we could be supporting people with warmer homes, and all of this money could be helping support these. An area that a colleague, a good friend of mine, has already alluded to is the carers allowance crisis. And that real challenge that we've got with over 136,000 people affected by this. That is the population of the Torbay Unitary Authority area that are affected by this. £250 million of cost on those people. And we fear as Liberal Democrats that the powers within this could make it even tougher for those who have challenges around carers allowance. But you don't have to just take it from me that the benefit system is broken. We have the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions who says the benefit system is broken. We have the Chancellor of the Exchequer saying that the benefit system is broken. And also we have the Prime Minister saying that the benefit system is broken. So if there is such agreement in government that the benefit system is broken, why are we adding more to this edifice? This edifice is built on a foundation of sand. And yet we're looking at piling more responsibilities onto this edifice without looking for true positive culture change within the DWP that we need to see. Now, colleagues have already alluded to the bill and areas of debate around the bill, and I'd like to just touch on a few key areas of that and where we have major concerns as Liberal Democrats. The opportunity for Orwellian levels of mass surveillance of those who have means-tested benefits that are proposed within this bill cause us grave concern.
Would you give way on that point?
I'm happy to give way, thank you.
He's got to a point where I wholeheartedly agree with him. There are something like 9.8 million people who will fall directly under the reach of this bill, plus their carers, landlords and a variety of other people, take it over 10 million people. I would think the number of fraudsters in that is not vanishingly small, but very small, and therefore we're going to put probably 9 million plus people under unnecessary surveillance. He's right to call it Orwellian.
Thank you, and I would concur strongly with my colleague there. Another area of core concern for us is the lowering of the bar of being able to take money out of people's bank accounts, and also the opportunities of being able to withdraw driving licences away from those who are offenders. But, again, as has been alluded to by colleagues, it is the best practice document that is missing. That was alluded to on a number of occasions, and it's difficult to understand the true nature of this bill if you don't know what that guidance is going to look like. Also, the fact that we've got some real challenges around King Henry VIII's powers, where there are elements of this bill that should be written within it, and yet they're not there. So there are some real issues there. The fact that the Secretary of State will be, the fact that the Secretary of State will be able to appoint their own independent reviewer of the bill. We welcome the independent reviewer, but not effectively marking your own homework by making the appointment yourself. The fact that we have, from Big Brother Watch to Age UK and a multitude of other charities highlighting concerns such as a breakdown in trust that this bill could bring to bear, amplifying challenges around people with disabilities, and then also potentially impacting on some of the most vulnerable people in our society, people with learning disabilities, causes us of great concern. What we would like to see is a real culture change. And in our manifesto as Liberal Democrats, we talked about co-design and working with people who are benefits claimants, who are people with disabilities, and making sure that the system is a better fit and a more fit for purpose, and taking a more relationship approach rather than an adversarial approach is the way forward as far as we're concerned. I would like to again return back to the carers investigation that is ongoing, not set to report back until the summer, later on this summer, and yet the government are rushing ahead with these proposals. I would suggest to colleagues that you do not back these proposals until we hear back from those findings and see what lessons can be learnt. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak in support of Amendments 10, 11 and 12 that are tabled in my name. I'd like to start, though, by placing on record my thanks to the Minister for Transformation and his willingness to engage in a discussion around the terms of this bill. This has been extremely helpful, and I wanted that to be placed on record. I'd also like to make it clear that in no way are my amendments seeking to undo or frustrate the government's legitimate aim of recovering public money from fraudsters and criminals. We absolutely need to do that to ensure that criminal behaviour does not undermine the benefits, the legitimacy or the standing of our welfare system. The bill rightly seeks to tackle organised crime and online fraud, but also, worryingly, ushers in dangerous new powers, compelling banks to trawl through financial information, even where...
Will you give way? I will. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I support his amendments. The fact is, though, isn't it, that millions of people, innocent people, with no suspicion at all around their behaviour, will now be subject to intrusion into their bank accounts. And isn't it odd that there's £40 billion worth of unpaid tax by tax avoiders, where there's also access to bank accounts, but it's rarely used. And in the last year that I've seen, only 1,000 people had their banks investigated out of 300,000 separate people suspected of tax avoidance. Is it not the case, then, that this legislation appears to treat wealthy tax avoiders differently from the poor?
Well said. I thank my honourable friend for his contribution, and in fact it is the very poorest in our society which are going to be affected most by this legislation. So banks will be able to trawl for financial information even where there is no suspicion of wrongdoing. That's the key point in this debate. The very poorest, disabled people on PIP, older people on pension credit, carers and those on universal credit will have less rights to privacy, effectively, than everyone else. And I am deeply concerned about the slippery slope, Madam Deputy Speaker, of compelling banks to act as an arm of the state. I will.
Can I say I'm extremely grateful to the Honourable Member for tabling this amendment. We have the finest legal system in the world, and one of the principles that exists is the presumption of innocence. The current bill, as tabled, undermines that fundamental principle. And of course, it's something that's going to raise stress, anxiety, and undermine the vulnerable people in our society. Does the honourable member agree that that is the position with this current bill?
I thank the honourable member for his contribution. Yes, and I'm going to address that shortly in my speech. It's not the purpose of the banks to act as an arm of the state, and this sets a very dangerous precedent that we need to be aware of in this House. We also know that organised crime groups responsible for over £7 billion worth of large-scale fraud will evade detection by spreading funds across multiple accounts beyond the reach of the algorithmic scanning that's going to be used to flag overpayments. It will be welfare recipients who are caught up in the net of bank surveillance, regardless of whether they're suspected of fraudulent activity or not.
On that point, will my honourable friend give way? I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I'd like to congratulate him on the eminently reasonable and common sense way in which he's approaching this debate. I'd like to congratulate him on his amendment number 11. Does it seem to my honourable friend, as it seems to me, that this takes place in a wider context where, with some of the tightening of eligibility for personal independence payments being proposed, we're moving towards a hostile environment for benefit claimants, particularly disabled benefit claimants, where we're going to end up treating benefit claimants as suspects automatically. And would he agree with me that it was right for us to oppose this when the Conservatives wanted to do this? And I put down an early day motion signed by nearly 50 MPs to that effect, and we have to oppose this now. And the best way to resolve this is by the government now accepting my honourable friend's eminently reasonable new...
Order! It's a very long intervention. Perhaps we'd be better off going back to Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I am going to cover the connection between this piece of legislation and the Green Paper very shortly.
Before we move on, we say, I thank the honourable member for being generous. Is the outcome for the individual disabled person he's concerned about, the vast majority of whom who commit no fraud, going to be any difference at all if these measures were implemented, because they're not affected, because they are not committing any crime?
No, that's not right at all. I think this bill introduces, as I've tried to explain, some very fundamental changes to the very nature of our welfare system. It introduces some very fundamental changes to the nature of our welfare system and its use.
I'm the signatory to Clause 11, to Amendment 11. But in answer to the point that's just been made to him, if the banks use algorithms, they'll have an error rate of at least 1%. That means there'll be 10,000 innocent people or more dragged through the system by this proposal.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and actually it brings me on to my next point, which is the risk of a Horizon-style scandal on a massive scale, given the sheer volume of accounts that are going to be scanned, and that is glaringly obvious, I think. These new powers also strip those who receive state support of the fundamental principle of British law, which is the point that my honourable friend made earlier, namely the presumption of innocence. Amendment 11 would ensure the government can tackle fraudsters, but would limit the use of an eligibility verification notice to cases where a welfare recipient is suspected of wrongdoing and not merely of error. This is a proportionate and necessary safeguard to prevent the corruption of our welfare system, from a safety net, which is meant to offer dignity and support to those in need, into a punitive system where accessing help comes at the cost of your privacy and civil liberties. I'd like to move on to Amendments 10 and 11. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bill also grants the Department draconian powers to apply to a court to have people stripped of their driving licences if they have an outstanding debt, whether for overpayment, fraud or error. Amendments 10 and 12 remove this power from the bill. There are fairer and more effective ways to enforce the law. Analysis of the bill has shown this measure will be used on people where assessment deems that a financial deduction would cause hardship. If it would, the debtor could face losing their licence. That's not justice in my view, that's a penalty for being poor. I've heard the claims that this will be a last resort when the debtor has failed to engage over a period of time. But this overlooks the fact that non-engagement can be a symptom of hardship, not wrongdoing. Many welfare recipients, including those with mental health conditions and caring responsibilities, find it difficult to navigate the complex bureaucracy of our social security system and may be unfairly deemed as not having engaged with the DWP. Sorry.
It's important and necessary to have legislation in place and to have better legislation to look after people. I don't think there's anyone in this chamber as an MP hasn't been confronted with a constituent who has inadvertently made a mistake. The complexity of the paperwork, the reams of questions you have to answer, for most people is just beyond their ability to respond. So does he share my concern, the concern of many others, that this system, if it continues to be complicated, then it will inadvertently drag people into a system that they're not responsible for?
I thank the honourable member for his contribution. I agree. I think the complexity of our system leads it and lends itself to errors by the individual who cannot navigate their way around what can be extremely difficult. During the committee stage of the bill, several witnesses explained that people avoid repayment due to a variety of reasons, including not knowing where to get help, simply being overwhelmed by the whole process, or facing multiple debts. And I hope the Minister will therefore provide further reassurance on this specific point about Amendments 10 and 12. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, all these challenges will only be made worse, in my view, if the Government proceeds with its planned cuts to disability benefits, affecting over 3 million families outlined in the recent Green Paper. The previous Government stripped our welfare state to the bone over 14 years of deep cuts. Disabled people are already far more likely to be in destitution and rely on food banks. But spying on millions of people or piling cuts onto a failed system will not repair our welfare model. The Government must pause for thought, meet with disability organisations and build a fairer system with their consent and confidence. Our welfare state needs to provide support to those who need it, and the change we promised as a Government must mean a more compassionate and caring society, one that enables rather than penalises. These are the values that make us different from the previous Government, and we shouldn't forget that.
Hear, hear.
That would be very helpful if members would try to confine themselves to 5 or so minutes for their speeches, but I don't propose to put a formal time limit on yet. Esther McVey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to speak in support of new Clause 11, the publication of results of pilot schemes. Because make no mistake, this bill allows for a massive expansion of state powers. It will permit mass financial surveillance of the public. It is a massive overreach by the state, so of course it needs close scrutiny. It needs the publication of those pilot schemes, and then they must be analysed. And I'll put this into context. Before the COVID years, fraud and error across the tax and benefits system was at an all-time low. Then, in 2020, after a state-imposed lockdown, and that's another massive state intervention, unprecedented financial support was set up for millions of people. This support was set up in a rush of panic, with the full support of both sides of the House. I exclude myself from this, but there were very few people who opposed it. And it opened up all new sorts of vulnerabilities within the system. And this system was only set up because of a blanket stay-at-home mandate from the state. It was the state that opened up those fraud vulnerabilities, and it was the state that saw through those impositions many millions more people go onto universal credit. I'll give you the figures. In March 2020, 3 million people were on universal credit. By November 2020, 5.8 million people. And in January 2025, 7.5 million on universal credit. And just like that heavy-handed state intervention of lockdown left the public paying a very high price, I am concerned that this bill, another heavy-handed state intervention, will also leave the public paying a very high price. And as Big Brother, watch states, The Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill will introduce an unprecedented system of mass financial surveillance, create a second-tier justice system for people on the poverty line, undermine the presumption of innocence, result in serious mistakes, risking the freedoms and funds of the country's elderly, disabled and poor, and turn Britain's once fair welfare system into a digital surveillance system. I've said it before and I'll say it again, lockdown was an experiment inflicted on the British people without their consent, and that experiment failed. This bill will be another such experiment on the British public. Now, we should not be surprised that we saw such an increase in the amount of money lost to fraud in the system, because the truth is that when there's a knee-jerk reaction to a moment of crisis, there will be serious repercussions. When the state takes extra powers, and when the powers of the state goes unchecked, many inequities flow, and this bill is another example. There seems to be an unwillingness to talk about this. There's a collective denial going on about the reality of what lockdown did to our country and the dire consequences we're all suffering. We need to admit our mistakes and learn from them. It is the only way we won't repeat such mistakes again of mass state intervention. That state intervention, a one-size-all-fits approach, exacerbated by haste and rapid deployment, lacks the detail of planning. It lacks tried and tested vehicles of delivery, and it lacks safeguards. The massive intervention proposed by this bill, at the very, very least, needs further testing, further piloting, and most importantly, the publication of those results, and those results being analysed. And I'm sorry to have to say this, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I have no faith in this government that it will have done the homework that is required to implement this scheme, and not without good reason. This is a government that does not have a good track record on doing impact assessments and doing their homework before major pieces of legislation are introduced, like removal of the winter fuel payment from pensioners, the fallout from that, VAT on schools, the impact there on schools, taxing on farms, the devastation there on the farming community, and food security, and the increase on employers' national insurance contribution, the impact there on business and employment. We're seeing a failure of not doing tests, impact assessments, and thoroughly working out how this will work. Much more detailed work needs to go into a change of this enormity. And this extraordinary power is ineffective and entirely disproportionate to the revenue the government expects to raise via its use. The government's own estimate is that less than 1.4% of the estimated annual loss to fraud and error they will get back. Talk about a hammer to crack a nut. This is power for power's sake, absolutely an unnecessary grab of power from the people. Today sees the threat unchecked and untested and coming forward. Looming on the horizon is other forms of state intervention, global intervention with the World Health Organisation's new international health regulations. Now is the time for people in this House to have these conversations about massive state interventions and why we do not want that. In conclusion, ironic, isn't it, that a massive state overreach and draconian legislation used for lockdown led to high levels of fraud and error and millions of more people on benefit. And it is supposedly now going to be solved and corrected by yet another massive state overreach and draconian legislation. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now.
John McDonnell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to... Sometimes in these debates you're trying to influence the front bench, and to be honest, in this legislation I've given up on that. So I just want to get on the record to my constituents why I'm concerned about this piece of legislation and why I'm supporting new Clause 11. On the issue, we all preface what we've been saying because we all want to tackle fraud. And can I, on the follow-up to the Honourable Lady's speech then, during that COVID process, I think I was the first MP to raise the issue of the massive fraud that was going on with regard to bank loans. And I wrote to the then Chancellor and various ministers, and I received back responses which were almost dictated by the banks, that all the security measures had put in place and that this was being administered effectively. We then discovered, I think it was 9 billion, or then there was 13 billion, but we recovered an element of that. So I'm very wary about making sure that public expenditure avoids levels of fraud that we saw during that occasion. But I am concerned about this piece of legislation itself, because I do think we're taking huge steps constitutionally, legally, and with regard to civil liberties with this legislation. And it's some of the points that people have made. Our tradition is that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. That's the legal principle from the Magna Carta onwards. And the investigation powers are usually triggered by some element of suspicion. This legislation rides roughshod over that long thousand-year tradition. And the issue of privacy, the reality is, whatever assurances we're giving about compliance with the human rights legislation, I have my doubts, but this is the introduction for the first time I've seen in this country of mass surveillance on an issue like this.
Gentlemen, thank you for giving way. The Honourable Gentleman goes right to the point I tried to raise with the Minister. There are 25 NGOs supporting Part 11, Amendment 11. It is almost certain, if we go down this route, this will end up in court. And I think the government will lose on Article 4, on the question of privacy, individual privacy.
If you follow the Honourable track record of his predictions on issues like this in the past, he's proved to have been right on virtually every occasion, so I agree. But in addition to the mass surveillance, I think the extent of the information that can be sought and can be interpreted from this legislation is, I think, extremely wide-ranging and open to challenge as well. But I think what's actually annoyed me as well, that we're now introducing legislation in advance of what we were promised by way of codes of conduct and operation. We have no idea how this is going to work out in practice without those codes. And within the codes that were set out, it was, if members recall, it was about how the system would operate in detail at every level, the information seeking, the investigatory powers, etc. Not to have those and then to be reassured, but don't worry, the other place will receive them. Well, that's not our responsibility as MPs. Our responsibility is to deal with the matter here. But we also don't know how the persons, the independent persons, as they're described in the legislation, are to be appointed either, how they're going to operate, or how, and the point was raised by a member opposite, about how their reports and recommendations will be then implemented, in fact, who they will be accountable to, and whether there's any role of accountability of those independent persons to this House. Can I just say, when in the past we've introduced legislation like this and it short-circuits the processes, the traditional protective mechanisms that we have constitutionally and legally, it has led time and time again to debacles and miscarriages. And I warn ministers, that's exactly what we're facing here. Reference has been made to the issues with regard to the use of computers, models, logarithms, etc. And we just seem to have learned nothing from where we've made those errors themselves. Can I just say this as well? And I raised it at second reading. What seems to be happening here is absolutely discriminatory. We're choosing a class of people, largely working class people, who are claiming benefits, and we're targeting them. If there was a group of people, a class of people that we wanted to target, that we knew had a record of fraud, who had a record of claiming for things that they shouldn't have done, well, here we are, because the expenses debacle, the scandal demonstrated, if there's one group of people we should be examining more closely, it's members of Parliament. I just want to talk very briefly, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be quick, about the impact. From a constituency point of view, this is my experience over, as an MP for 28 years now, then before that a councillor, so over 40 years experience. In my constituency, I meet lots of people who don't claim the benefits that they should, that they're entitled to. Often older people, but actually others as well. Why don't they do that? It's the stigma attached to claiming benefits. And what we're doing in this legislation, we're adding a bit more, aren't we? A little bit more stigma that will act as a disincentive to those people who genuinely qualify for benefits and should be coming forward. And it is that terror of error and that fear of actually risking being penalised for claiming a benefit that you may not be entitled to, or an error occurs and you've been paid too much. And there's a real fear out there amongst my constituents about that when those miscarriages hit. But the other point I'd like to make is most of the constituents that come to our constituency surgeries, they've tried everything else by the time they get to us. And they're the ones with the most chaotic lives. And they're the ones who get sanctioned time and time again, not for any deliberate act, but often because they've got mental health issues or something within their life prevents them from attending that interview or applying for enough jobs in time, that sort of thing. And what will happen? They'll be dragged into this system again. And at the moment, the way things are, they come to us, largely in my constituency, because most of the advice agencies have been closed down because of cuts that have taken place as well, and they come to us in desperation. I think this will make people even more desperate. I think it will deter people who should be claiming from claiming, and I think it will cause real hardship and severe penalties to those least deserving. And that's why I think it's a poor piece of legislation. I actually do think in some time, I don't think it'll take long, we'll be back here again to amend this legislation to restore some elements of civil liberties and protection for the poorest in our society.
And with an immediate 4-minute time limit, John Milne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When it comes to public money, everyone accepts the importance of preventing fraud. There's no dispute about that. The mere thought that our benefit system could be exploited loosens the cement holding our welfare system together. However, if we look back in history, there's been a track record of fraud recovery measures not delivering what they hoped. Probably this measure also will never save the 1.5 billion that's expected of it. So I ask, will the alleged rewards of this legislation ever match the scale of the imposition on our civil liberties, and are we really going after the right targets? We all want to catch deliberate and professional fraudsters, but they are precisely the people who are astute enough to change tactics, set up separate bank accounts and avoid suspicion, as the Honourable Member for Poole alluded to earlier. Instead, it will be the innocent and the accidental claimants who fall into the trap. The implicit assumption is that we should trust in the DWP as a completely error-free organisation across the entirety of its massive operation. But they do make mistakes. They make mistakes all the time. And even when they know they've made a mistake, and they've been told so, they're very capable of making the same mistake again. In my constituency of Horsham, Anthony and his husband were accused of providing misinformation to the DWP and being overpaid £10,000 as a result. Anthony protested without success. After a long fight, it went to appeal. The tribunal wasted no time deciding in his favour, an open and shut case. But then earlier this year, Anthony and his husband were migrated over to Universal Credit. After confirming all details were correct, the DWP overpaid them again and then sought to claw the money back over the following months. Their mistake, Anthony pays the penalty. The DWP has its rules, but real life doesn't run in straight lines. Real life is messy. How could we possibly rely on the DWP to mark its own homework when we know that there are just 4 fraud advisors per regional office to handle cases flagged by frontline staff? Yes, there are some checks and balances within this legislation, But what is really needed is a profound cultural change within the DWP, and that is much harder to achieve. The common experience of people who actually have to deal with them on a daily basis is that they are always looking to catch you out. Years and years of inflammatory rhetoric under a succession of Conservative governments have convinced people to regard the DWP as their enemy, not their friend. And if anything, this bill digs that hole a little deeper. What concerns me most about this bill, however, is the extreme overconfidence. It assumes that government agencies always get things right, and that individual citizens are to be automatically treated as objects of suspicion. Now, the government was very resistant to any amendments except its own during the Bill Committee stage, so I very much hope that they will reconsider today and accept the Liberal Democrat amendments as listed. Thank you.
David Pinto-Duschinsky.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise to speak against Amendments 2, 4, 5, 6, 8 and 9 and new clauses 12 and 15. Madam Deputy Speaker, fraud in the benefit system affects us all. It costs us as a country almost £1 million an hour. It takes money from the most vulnerable in society, and it undermines the legitimacy of and public support for our social security system. Yet many of the amendments mentioned simply do not recognise the vital need for this legislation. Some, like Amendments 2 and 9, would hamstring the bill by preventing us gathering key information. Others, like Amendments 8, 5 and 6, would limit the effectiveness of the bill and make its powers more difficult to use. Yet others, like Amendments 4 and new clause 12 and 15, would seek to delay its effects. These amendments, however differently proposed, all suffer from the same pathology. They fail to take fraud seriously. We've heard a number of speeches today from opponents of the bill, and yet we are yet to hear any serious practical suggestions from them about how we might tackle fraud. They say they are concerned to protect the vulnerable, but I say to them gently, they can offer no proposals on how to prevent the fraud that is stealing from the neediest in our society. I know many members are coming from a very genuine place of concern about how to strike the right balance in protecting the public purse on the one hand and the privacy and rights of claimants on the other. And I say to them, I think the bill gets the balance right. The powers it provides are proportional. No, I've got very limited time, so I will make progress. The powers it provides are proportionate, measured and ringed with safeguards. It is a mark of this, as we heard from the Secretary of State at the second reading debate, that the Information Commissioner has stated that the bill, as currently drafted, has addressed their previously stated concerns. The powers are proportionate, and they are also necessary to fight the ever more sophisticated frauds we are facing. Over the last decade, financial institutions have extensively overhauled their use of technology and data and their approaches to the evolving fraud threat. Yet the government has not. It is illuminating, but perhaps not surprising, that while social security fraud has risen dramatically post-COVID, fraud volumes and losses in the financial service sector, including credit card fraud, has actually fallen, according to UK Finance. The public sector has paid a steep price for not modernising its anti-fraud approach and failing to adopt industry best practice. It's a gap that this bill seeks to address. But most of all, the measures in this bill are crucial for protecting the vulnerable and safeguarding the legitimacy of the system itself. Our social security system rests on public consent and a belief that money is fairly spent. Fraud and error chips away at this social contract. It takes money from those who need it most. The public in Hendon and across the country expect us to take action. There is nothing progressive whatsoever about permitting fraud. The only people who benefit are the criminals who exploit our system and those who wish to undermine its role as a cornerstone of a civilised and fair society. So for the sake of the most vulnerable, for the sake of the taxpayer, the sake of fairness and the sake of the system itself, I hope the system will join me in supporting the bill and voting down these amendments. Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there continues to be many problems with this bill, but I do recognise that the Minister and his team have had extensive conversations with the Scottish Government and made a number of amendments as a result of that. I do welcome the communication between the two. I would urge the Minister to ensure that the DWP team have extensive conversations in advance of the welfare bill coming, so that we do not have the requirement for so many government amendments at report stage for when how the bill interacts with the Scottish legislation and the Scottish systems. In terms of the different amendments that are down, on new clause 1 around carers allowance, I think it's completely fair to wait until the review has been done. I do think that there needs to be a significant look into this, and clawing back money from people without seeing the results of that review would be incredibly problematic, so I'd be happy to support that amendment. In terms of the comments around sickfluencers, I have concerns that the way that the amendment is drafted, and I understand that the Shadow Minister has tried to draft it so as to exclude those people who are giving advice, but I'm concerned that it might unintentionally catch some of those people that are providing the advice, so I would not be keen to support that amendment on this basis, because I think that I'd be worried about the actual genuine advice people being caught up in it, but I do understand that she has attempted to carefully draft it in order to try and avoid that. In terms of Amendment 11, I would be more than happy to support this. The SNP will support this. In terms of the suspicion of wrongdoing, and particularly thinking about the speech that the member from Hayes and Harlington made there, I wasn't actually going to mention the propensity of MPs to fraudulently claim things, or previous MPs to do so. But in terms of looking at who actually costs the taxpayer significant amounts of money, if the government were to sit there and say, we know that people who hold millions of pounds in offshore trust funds, for example, quite often dodge tax, and were to say we're going to survey all of their bank accounts, then I imagine there would be some sort of uprising, particularly from some of the more wealthy people that we are aware of. But because the government is saying it's cool, it's just poor people that are being impacted by this, we're all expected to just assume that this is fine. And it's not. It's not fine. It's an absolute imposition on people's lives. It's looking at people's... It's treating everybody, as has been said by a number of people, like they are fraudsters. And looking at the amount of money that is set to be saved by this, the government is going to save less money annually on this than the DWP makes in overpayments annually. Surely, rather than imposing on so many people's civil liberties, cracking down on DWP official error overpayments, which would save more money, would be a better place to begin in terms of doing this. It's absolutely daft looking at this. The new clause 7 that has been proposed by my colleague from Brighton Pavilion, I completely agree with, and particularly in terms of the reasonable expectation that people could understand that they had been overpaid. I had a constituent that contacted me recently, and they've got a letter telling them they're going to be migrated to universal credit. My constituent is terrified that they're going to be deported, because the word migrated was used in that letter that they received. They do not understand the language that's been put to them by DWP. And given the fact that universal credit is so incredibly complicated to calculate, there are so many people that could not reasonably have been expected to understand that they were being overpaid, and therefore DWP should be taking that into account before looking at this mass surveillance.
There's nobody else bobbing on the government side. Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This bill addresses a serious issue, fraud and error in our public services, and I welcome the current government's continuation of the work of the previous government to protect taxpayers' money and uphold the integrity of our welfare system. The amendments proposed by the official opposition do not undermine the bill, they actually enhance it. Our amendments to the bill preserve the fundamental principles of fairness and proportionality, while strengthening the tools at our disposal to tackle wrongdoing. In this spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak in support of New Clause 8 and New Clause 21. New Clause 8 is a measured and necessary proposal. It simply brings the Department for Work and Pensions in line with other government bodies. such as HMRC and the Child Maintenance Service, which already have the power to issue arrest warrants for cases of serious fraud against the state. Why should it lack these enforcement capabilities when the crimes that it deals with are just as serious? The taxpayer enters into a social contract with the state, a contract based on trust, responsibility and accountability. And my constituents in Mid-Leicestershire pay their taxes and quite rightly expect that those who cheat, lie or exploit the system will face the consequences. We in this House are the guardians of that social contract. If the public believe we are turning a blind eye to fraud or are failing to act decisively, that trust begins to erode. The social contract itself will be put at risk. Illegal actions must have legal consequences. In supporting New Clause 8, the government could send a clear and unequivocal message: fraud and deceit have no place in our society. Now, turning to New Clause 21, it has recently been highlighted that individuals are using social media to promote ways of defrauding the system, including the Motability Scheme. This is deeply troubling. While ministers have previously responded positively to my own questions on this, the current version of the bill does not go far enough. Unless the government supports our amendments, it will be failing to take the concrete steps needed to address this evolving form of deceit. Madam Deputy Speaker, this House has an opportunity today, an opportunity to work across party lines to further strengthen the bill, an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to protecting the social contract between the government and those governed. Let us act with unity and resolve to reduce fraud, to restore public trust, and to ensure that our systems of work works for those who truly need them, and not for those who seek to abuse them.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Under the previous Conservative government, fraudsters got away with claiming billions of pounds of COVID support funds as an eye-watering £39.8 billion a year when uncollected due to tax evasion and other criminal activity. And while vulnerable members of our society have seen their benefits cut and our public services are in need of investment, it is not right that public spending has been misplaced into the pockets of fraudsters, and I am therefore grateful for many of the measures in this bill which will work to reduce instances of fraud. However, I have concerns about some of the broader measures in this legislation regarding the powers it would give the Department for Work and Pensions and the potentially intrusive impact that this could have on the civil liberties of citizens. So I wish today to speak in support of New Clause 23, tabled in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Torbay. This amendment would require a report to Parliament within 6 months of the causes and cost of public sector fraud during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this would include an account of any fraudulent payments, a review of procurement practices during COVID, including contracting for suppliers, and the role of political appointments and personal connections in procurement decisions, as well as an assessment of the adequacy of government oversight to prevent fraud against public authorities. And I would just mention that as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, both in this Parliament and the previous Parliament, much of this work has already been undertaken by that committee and would be very worth the while of the Minister to take a look at some of our reporting on those topics. And if failings are found, the amendment would require an outline of corrective actions, including a statement to this House to acknowledge these findings and set out actions planned to ensure any failings are not repeated. With public trust in politics at alarmingly low levels, we must be taking all possible steps to ensure integrity and the highest possible standards in governance. The cronyism, rule-breaking and sleaze scandals of the last Conservative government did huge damage to public trust in politics and politicians in this country, and this amendment, if accepted, would lead to an increase of accountability, and I urge the Minister to accept it. And while I'm glad to see the government introduce measures which would crack down on instances of fraud, I have grave concerns about some of the broader measures in this legislation which would lead to an unacceptable increase in intrusion on individual privacy. And that's why I'd like to speak today in favour of Amendment 2, which would revoke Clause 74. This amendment would remove the requirement for banks to look into relevant claimants' bank accounts. Some measures in this bill raise significant concerns regarding the privacy of individuals, and I have heard from constituents who are alarmed at some of the powers which could be introduced with this legislation. I believe that fraud must be rooted out and that more should be done to prevent fraud happening in the first place. However, Clause 74 is an unnecessary and invasive step which I urge the government to refrain from taking. I've heard from people who are concerned about the powers granted in this bill because it enables the government to have direct access to individuals' bank accounts, even enabling the DWP to withdraw funds or revoke driving licences. This concern is particularly serious when it comes to vulnerable groups such as the elderly, disabled people, those living in poverty, who could face devastating consequences from wrongful penalties. So I welcome the government's commitment to cracking down on fraud. There have been clear failures by the previous Conservative government during the COVID pandemic, which we saw highlighted with the PPE procurement scandal and the bypassing of the usual procurement rules via VIP lanes. It's essential that there are proper rules in place to ensure that public spending is carried out in an effective, efficient and transparent way, and I'm glad to support new Clause 23, which would strengthen transparency and accountability on this issue. However, grave concerns about intrusive powers which this legislation could introduce have been expressed across the House today, particularly those that allow the government to require banks and other financial institutions to share client data, and as such I urge the Minister to accept this amendment and withdraw this clause from the bill. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I'm just looking around the chamber at Joanna Baxter, but I think I am looking at it inaccurately, so I'll go to Sean Berry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is a lot I could say, but I will mainly just commend to members my new Clause 7, which will remove official error from the most punitive measures in the second part of the bill. I spoke against the whole suite of intrusive legislation in the second part of this bill at the second reading, and Green MPs still oppose it now. I was pleased to serve on the Public Bill Committee, and I will be supporting a number of other amendments that I also back there too, alongside honourable members from both sides of this House who proposed them. In both these places, I described how this bill, in my view, does treat already stigmatised benefit claimants as suspects, not citizens, via blanket intrusion and surveillance. I think it's absolutely wrong that this legislation goes through in this form. I think the first part works, the second part is absolutely out of order. New Clause 7, however, in my name, is very shortly about fair play. It would bring in a test for the recovery of universal credit overpayments caused by official error into line with Regulation 100(2) of the Housing Benefit Regulations 2006, so they could be recovered only where the claimant could have reasonably been expected to realise that there was an overpayment. Yeah. And make no mistake, mistakes by the DWP can have huge financial and psychological impacts on people who are receiving benefits, and the risk of harm is particularly acute for those official error overpayments which individuals literally have no way of anticipating. So can I also point out that new Clause 7 is also equivalent to an amendment proposed by Labour frontbenchers during the passage of the Welfare Reform Act back in 2012, when the government first started to recover universal credit overpayments at all. So turning to other few important amendments before the House today, I want to restate my support for Amendments 2 and 5 in the name of the Honourable Member for Torbay. These seek to simply remove the totally indefensible bank spying powers. I also want to express my support for Amendments 10 and 12 in the name of the Honourable Member for Poole. These rightly seek to do away with the driving disqualification powers, which I've previously opposed to. And I want to put on record my support for Amendment 11, also in the name of the Honourable Member for Poole, which quite rightly limits the bank spying powers to cases with existing suspicion of wrongdoing. I am as well pleased that the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree has taken forward Amendments 8 and 9 that I moved during the committee stage. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I and my Green colleagues will also be voting for NC1 in the name of the Honourable Member for Torbay on carers, allowance and lessons learned. Madam Deputy Speaker, it matters when we treat people who need a safety net as suspects. It matters when governments invade privacy in a blanket intrusion that affects older people, disabled people and other minorities in a disproportionate way. And it matters that the powers proposed today extend to punishing and impoverishing citizens for our own department's mistakes. Treating people with humanity and due process should be the default setting, not these intrusive new blanket laws. And I hope Parliament will ask ministers to dial up the competence, dial down the stigma and think again today.
Diolch yn fawr, Madam Dirprwy Llefarydd.
Over the past few months, it's been one thing after another for the vulnerable, the sick and disabled people. The recently announced cut to welfare will affect 6% of the population in Wales, according to policy and practice, punishing the sick and disabled. And this bill adds to that punishment by increasing state financial surveillance on welfare recipients. This bill is full of intrusive measures, from granting access to 3 months of bank statements to allowing direct deductions from bank accounts without court orders, and to the provision of police-pace powers to enter and search property. And that's not just my opinion. Numerous charities and organisations, from Age Concern to the Child Poverty Action Group, support Big Brother's Watch recommendation to oppose eligibility verification powers under Clause 74, for example. And similar powers were previously proposed under the former Conservative government and considered a potential breach of privacy under the Human Rights Act. And Labour MPs at that time were amongst critics of these powers, and it's disappointing actually to see so few Labour MPs here today, but thank those who have actually spoken up once again. I'm glad to see the amendments, such as Amendment 8 and 9, tabled by the Honourable Member for Liverpool Wavertree, and Amendment 11, tabled by the Honourable Member from Poole, that seek to address these concerns, including limiting or removing powers to compel banks to provide sensitive financial information. Because even though this provision is causing real anxiety and distress, such as for my constituent Simon Mead and his family, Mr Mead's daughter, who receives PIP due to a long-term effects of brain cancer as a child, and his son, who suffers from psychosis and schizophrenia, are extremely worried. Both are extremely worried about the government accessing their private financial decisions. It's already affecting their day-to-day life and decisions. And when I wrote to the government outlining Mr Mead's concerns before this bill was published, I was told the bill is not designed to cause distress or to undertake covert surveillance of disabled people or any benefit claimant. Well, that obviously isn't happening, is it? But combined with restricting winter fuel payments, the refusal to abolish the two-child cap, the sweeping welfare cuts, many vulnerable and disabled people genuinely feel that they are being disproportionately targeted. And this is a reality that the Labour government must accept and address. This bill further stigmatises people who we are supposed to protect, those who are entitled to state support, who are already suffering following recent UK government decision. And as Members of Parliament, it is our job to better people's lives and to ensure that everyone in our community feels supported. We are here to serve all our constituents, which includes the vulnerable, the elderly, the disabled and infirm. We are not here to cause further distress and hardship. We need to ensure that constituents have the access to the help and the services that they need. Sadly, this bill does the very opposite of that. John.
That is the end of the backbench contributions. We come to the front bench, and I believe that the Shadow Minister, a little bit quick jog there, the Shadow Minister will like to say a few words. Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with the leave of the House, I will just make a few additional comments, if I may, and it provides a perfect opportunity to respond to some of the points that were made specifically about the Conservative amendments or new clauses today. The first one I just want to touch on briefly was to the Honourable Member from Hendon, who quite rightly was on a short time limit on his speeches and was not able to take any interventions. But I just wanted to speak to the points that he made in terms of including our new clauses. For example, new clause 12, he rattled off the other numbers really quickly, so forgive me that I didn't hear all of them, but I believe it was included new clause 12 and new clause 15, and his implication was that those additional clauses that we've tabled would delay the bill being put into law. And I would just want to say I don't believe that would be the case, because as each of them is worded, it implies that it would be after the bill or the Act has been put into power. So they were just those additional safeguards around the cost implications for banks, annual reporting, and the publication of an anti-fraud and error technology strategy, just additional safeguards and points that we think would make the Act even better should it be passed today, rather than something that we were hoping would essentially be wrecking amendments. So I just wanted to say that regardless of the others that you might have included, the Honourable Member may have included in his list, ours are certainly not in that vein. The other comments that were made was by the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North, particularly around our new clause 21, and the Honourable Member said she was very slightly unhappy about the concern that there might be those who are genuinely seeking to help benefit claimants to get what they were entitled to could inadvertently get caught in the net of this legislation. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would just say that, again, that was not our intent. It was to ensure that only those who are seeking to push people to commit fraud would be caught, and where some of those citizens' advice services, or as I mentioned earlier, Improving Lives Plymouth, who are looking to help people claim what they're entitled to, they would not be caught in this new clause, because they would only be involved in error if there was a mistake made, rather than fraud. So I appreciate what the Honourable Member said, but feel that actually what we were intending is not that. And I believe the wording of our new clause would cover that as it needs to be said. Just two other points, Madam Deputy Speaker. There was a concern that was raised during the committee stage, which was around the extent of the bank accounts that are searched, and the fact that what is not tackled in this Act, is, in our view, are other bank accounts that those who may be committing fraud are in possession of, which would not be checked by this Act. And so therefore we probably need to go further in the future to make sure that we are tackling everything to make sure that fraud is properly dealt with. And just in a light-hearted moment, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, anybody reading the playback of this debate will see plenty of references to cheesecake, and I just thought I should imply why that is what happened. There was a concern raised during the debate about the fact that this bill would see individual transactions in a bank account assessed and perhaps judged, and that therefore everybody would feel terrible if they had bought a cheesecake from Waitrose or in other shops are available, and that would be a problem for people in the future. And so just for anybody wondering why we were talking about that, it's around having transactions checked, and the Minister at the time very kindly reassured us all that this bill will not be checking individual transactions, it will just be dealing with the benefit payments that somebody is receiving and whether they have capital that is potentially in that they should be having whilst also claiming benefits. So I will leave it there, but I hope that that is helpful.
Now we come to the final wind-up with the Minister, Andrew Weston. Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and with the leave of the House, I will begin by thanking all honourable members for their contributions, and with the time I have, will try to respond to some of the points that have been raised. I have listened closely to the concerns set out by a number of members across the House, and I will, of course, ensure that those are taken forward as the bill progresses to the other place. However, for today, I will be resisting all non-government amendments. If I may make some initial comments on the contributions of several members who spoke before turning specifically to the nature of amendments and new clauses. So in her opening contribution, the opposition spokesperson, the member for South West Devon, spoke, as did the member for Mid-Leicestershire, on how this bill builds on the work that the previous administration had sought to bring forward on the tackling of fraud and error. I have to say I consider that a fairly generous interpretation of the work of the previous government, not least because they had absolutely no powers set out that I can find anywhere on the Public Sector Fraud Authority and tackling fraud across the public sector, and moreover nothing on debt recovery. The only evidence that we can find of any new powers that the previous government was seeking to bring forward is in the eligibility verification space. I accept that they sought to do that, albeit that they did that in a rather botched fashion, subject to significant criticism and with none of the safeguards and oversight in place that are now built into this bill. I absolutely agree with her, though, that this government cannot and will not be complacent in tackling fraud. I'd just gently say that having allowed fraud and error to spiral to £9.7 billion in the welfare system at the time of the last election, I fear that the same could not be said of the previous government. The honourable gentleman from Torbay, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, spoke of a broken welfare system. I don't want to be drawn into a debate on that, but what I would certainly say is that a broken approach to tackling benefit fraud and error is certainly a part of any problem that the department does face. I want to spend some time, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I will do so later on when I turn to the amendment specifically addressing the points of my honourable friend, the member for Poole, largely articulated in his Amendment 11 around the eligibility verification measure. He and other members, the member for Aberdeen North, my right honourable friend from Hayes and Harlington, spoke to the impact that this would have on the very poorest, giving them less rights to privacy than everybody else. I understand their concerns, but I do have to say gently to members that that is not my interpretation, because we have already established in this place the right of government to receive information from private organisations, including banks and building societies, or data that points to financial standing. So, for instance, HMRC already received data on every interest-bearing account in the country. So this is not an unprecedented power. To be clear, HMRC send out 550 notices to data holders covering 130 million accounts and 100 notices to card acquiring service providers, with HMRC receiving 20 million lines of data on card sales. So I understand the concerns of honourable members, but I would challenge gently the extent to which this is unprecedented. He also set out, and this was alluded to by my right honourable friend also from Hayes and Harlington, the risk of a Horizon-type event. And I do just want to assure the House of a very clear difference, because the Horizon scandal emerged because evidence had been taken from a single source. That will not be the case here. We will, of course, receive flagged information from banks of a potential breach of eligibility criteria. However, this will not be the source of evidence that is sufficient to prove fraud. What that will do is trigger a look at that account, and if there is not an obvious reason why somebody may be potentially in breach of eligibility criteria, then that would then trigger a human investigation that would look at a range of sources of evidence to establish the reason why. Only then would there be any suggestion that fraud or indeed error has occurred, because there can be legitimate reasons for somebody, for instance, having an amount of capital above the amount allowed by their benefit. For instance, in universal credit, where the amount is £16,000, were somebody to have received, let's use the example, a payment as a result of the Horizon scandal, or for instance the infected blood scandal, of more than that, they would be exempt. So I do understand the concerns, but I have to say that I do think that it is distinct from the Horizon scandal, of course.
To stop social security payments until that human intervention has investigated.
I am very, very happy to provide that assurance. She's stolen my next line. But yes, I am able to say categorically that this is a data push only. No decisions will be taken as a direct result other than a decision to look further into an account and potentially initiate a human investigation if needed. I also wanted to say a little more about Amendments 10 and 12 that my honourable friend had put forward with regard to driving licences, because in his speech he rightly set out the fact that welfare recipients may not be able to engage with the department. And I just want to say for the record that nobody in receipt of benefits or paid through PAYE employment will be in scope for the debt recovery powers and therefore for the power to suspend driving licences. And anybody who we do seek to suspend the driving licence of, it is worth remembering that we have made multiple attempts through our debt management team, at least 4 attempts to contact them, at least 4 further attempts through our debt enforcement team, have established their ability to repay by looking at 3 months' bank statements. It is only then, if when we seek to deduct from that bank account, an individual has removed the funds that we know that they have, that we would then seek a consideration. We would look into the possibility of suspending their driving licence. Even then, Madam Deputy Speaker, because this is very much a last resort power, we would seek to agree a repayment plan with them right up until the end. The court would set repayment terms were a driving licence to be suspended, and it is worth saying also that it is always a suspended decision subject to compliance with a repayment plan affordably set by the court. So when I say that this is a power of last resort, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that that assures colleagues of all of the many steps that are in place before we reach that point, and most importantly of all, that this does not apply to current benefit recipients or anybody paid through PAYE employment. The member for Tatton mentioned the new clause 11 around publication of pilot schemes, and I would just like to clarify for the House that we are not proposing any further pilot schemes as a result of introducing this legislation. 2 pilot schemes had already taken place, and so we know that this works. We will be adopting a test and learn approach so that we can scale this up, but the question of whether this is a mechanism that will yield information that is helpful to us in our inquiries is something that was settled by the previous government, of course.
Minister, has all of the details and all the information of the only pilot schemes the government's prepared to do, have they been published in their entirety?
Information of that nature was published prior to second reading and is available to members. So turning then specifically to the amendments that have attracted and new clauses that have attracted the most attention in the debate today, Madam Deputy Speaker. New clause 1, put down by the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, the Honourable Member for Torbay, pertains to carers allowance. And may I start by paying tribute to the millions of unpaid carers across the country. This government values carers highly and recognises the vital and valuable contribution that they make every day. Like others, I see that in my constituency work week after week, and I am in awe of all they do. This government inherited a system where busy carers, already struggling under a huge weight of responsibility, have been left having to repay large sums of overpaid carers allowance, sometimes worth thousands of pounds. We need to understand exactly what went wrong so we can set out our plan to put this right. That is why we launched an independent review of earnings-related overpayments, and we were delighted that Liz Sayce agreed to lead that review, which will investigate how overpayments of carers allowance have occurred, what can best be done to support those who have accrued them, and how to reduce the risk of these problems occurring in future. The independent review is now underway and is anticipated to conclude this summer. But we aren't sitting back, we are taking action now. We continue to review and improve our communications with carers to make it as easy as possible for them to tell us when something has changed in their life, which could affect their carers allowance entitlement. Moreover, this government introduced the largest ever increase in the earnings limit since carers allowance was introduced, with the weekly carers allowance earnings limit increasing to £196 from the 7th of April this year. It is now pegged permanently to 16 hours, of course.
On this point, clearly many carers have been affected by overpayments, and it comes as a shock to many who are trying to work to bridge that gap between carers allowance and their family's costs, and it has a significant impact on their mental health. So does the Minister share my gratitude to Liz Sayce for the work she's doing to look into this issue and to hopefully provide clarity for those many carers who are trying to juggle unpaid family care and work?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend's comments. Liz Sayce is doing excellent work, and I look forward to seeing the conclusions of her review in due course. Of course. But turning specifically to the content of new Clause 1, as I have set out, the independent review has been commissioned and is expected to arrive at its conclusions this summer. It would be irresponsible for me to commit in advance to implementing all recommendations at this stage. As the House would understand, these will need to be given careful consideration when they are provided to the Department. Moreover, I do not believe that this amendment would have the effect. I won't if he doesn't mind, I'm quite short of time. This amendment would prevent recovery of carers' allowance overpayments via the new recovery powers in this bill, but the DWP would still be able to recover carers' allowance overpayments through deductions from benefits or through deductions from PAYE earnings. This would place carers in an unequal position in regard to overpayment recovery, with recovery depending on if they were in receipt of benefit or in PAYE employment or not. Even as I believe the amendment was intended, suspending recovery of all carers' allowance overpayments until the independent review has concluded would be disproportionate. There are existing safeguards and protections for those with overpayments, including appeal rights, affordable repayment plans and, in exceptional circumstances, the option to waive the debt. Turning then, Madam Deputy Speaker, to new Clause 21, and as was spoken to by the opposition spokesperson, the member for South West Devon, and I'll make some reference also to new Clause 8 in just setting out my view of this, because these seek to create new offences. New Clause 8 proposes a new offence of fraud against a public authority. It is my view that this is already covered by existing offences, making the amendment duplicative and unnecessary. Fraud is already an offence under the Fraud Act 2006, and the common law offence of conspiracy to defraud, regardless of whether the fraud is against public authorities or anyone else, is already in existence. With the introduction of the Government amendments to Clause 70 to bring the offences in Sections 6 and 7 of the Fraud Act 2006 of possessing, making and supplying articles for the use in frauds, together with the existing offences of assisting and encouraging, which are found in the Serious Crime Act 2007, Sections 44 to 46, the scope of the issue committee members were concerned about influencer style offences, where the person provides knowledge to commit a fraudulent act in internet videos or manuals, can be tackled. The outcome of this will, of course, I won't, I'm afraid. I've already taken an intervention from the Honourable Gentleman on this subject earlier, but I am short of time. Well, had he stayed for the whole debate, I might be more willing to do so, but I have responded to his request for a point of order. Sorry, an intervention, rather. So it is my view, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we simply need to enforce existing law. Similarly, with new Clause 21, this seeks to amend the Social Security Act to introduce an offence for encouraging or assisting fraud. Again, it's not my view that this is necessary. Again, covered by the Fraud Act 2006 and Serious Crime Act 2007. But the Honourable Lady did ask for assurance that we will use the powers that we do have. As I said earlier in response to interventions from honourable members, I have commissioned work within the department to look at how we can further use the powers that we do have, as it is not my view that historically we've taken best advantage of that. I'm sorry, not. I can't, I'm afraid. Turning then to new Clause 10. We do want to ensure that government has access to a wide but appropriate and proportionate range of debt recovery powers, so that we have multiple methods to recover money from those who have the means to pay but refuse to do so. However, new Clause 10 is not required, as equivalent action is already provided for through existing legislation for the DWP and by Clause 16 of this bill for the PSFA. Clause 16 clarifies that the PSFA is able to seek alternative civil recovery through the civil courts, in addition to the direct deduction orders and deduction from earnings orders in this bill. So this could include liability orders as things stand. I think I've largely covered Amendment 11, Madam Deputy Speaker, but in closing, I do just want to make a few observations about Amendments 8 and 9 that were tabled by my honourable friend for Liverpool Wavertree, but spoken to by other members. These would, in my view, reduce the effectiveness of our debt recovery powers as proposed in the bill, so they are not something that I can agree to at this point. But I do know and recognise the importance of dialogue with customers all the way through the journey of debt recovery, and as I set out in response to the concerns of my honourable friend from Poole about the revocation of somebody's driving licence, we will seek to engage at all stages of the journey. If we identify any vulnerabilities, we would cease recovery, and at all stages we would look to agree an affordable repayment plan. So in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope I have addressed the majority of the points raised by honourable and right honourable members, and I'd like to thank them again for their contributions today. I'd also like to thank the witnesses who gave their time to the committee, those who have provided written evidence, and finally extend my thanks to the clerks, House staff and civil servants who have contributed to the passage of this bill. For too long, too little effort has been made to get a grip on public sector fraud, resulting in the totally unacceptable levels we see today. But with this bill, we are taking the powers needed to act and to finally take the fight to the crooks and the con artists, from criminal gangs attacking our welfare system to COVID fraudsters who stole from hard-working people in a time of national emergency. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is critical. It will save us billions of pounds. It is part of a broader package in the Department to save £9.6 billion for the DWP by 2030, and I hope all members will feel able to support it today.
Colin, I'm going to have to one time. The question is that Government New Clause 17 be read a second time. As many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the Government New Clause 17 be added to the bill. As many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Beautifully done, Madam. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I just need a moment. A moment, yes. We now come to Government New Clauses 80.
Sorry. Under the
Of course. Under the order of the House of the 3rd of Feb, I must now put the questions necessary to bring proceedings on consideration to a conclusion. We come to Government New Clauses 18 to 20. I call the Minister to move New Clauses 18 to 20 formally. The question is that New Clauses 18 to 20 be added to the bill. As many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. New Clause 1 has been selected for separate decision. I call Liberal Democratic spokesperson to move New Clause 1 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that New Clause 1 be added to the bill. As many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Clear the lobby. On the order paper, as many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tenants for the ayes are Zoe Franklin and Will Forster, and tenants for the noes are Gerald Jones and Jen Kitchen.
ayes to the right, 73. The noes to the left, 255.
The ayes to the right, 73. The noes to the left, 255. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. New clause 10 has been selected for separate decision. I call the opposition spokesperson to move new clause 10 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that new clause 10 be added to the bill. As many as are opinion say aye. Aye. No? No. Lobby. Question is as on the order paper. As many in that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes are Rebecca Poole and Jerome Mayhew. The tellers for the noes are Gerald Jones and Jen Kitchen. Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 101. The noes to the left, 258.
The ayes to the right, 101. The noes to the left, 258. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. New clause 21 has been selected for separate decision. I call the opposition spokesperson to move new clause 21 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that new clause 21 be added to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. No. No. Red lobby. The question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no.
No.
Tell us for the ayes are Rebecca Poole and Jerome Mayhew. Tell us for the noes are Gerald Jones and Jen Kitchen.
Ayes to the right, 95. The noes to the left, 257.
The ayes to the right, 95. The noes to the left, 257. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. I call the Minister to move amendments 23 to 31, 76, 75, 32 to 43, 79, 78, 77, 74, 73, 44, 72 and 45 formally.
Move formally.
The question is that Government Amendments 23 to 31, 76, 75, 32 to 43, 79, 78, 77, 74, 73, 44, 72 and 45 be made. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Amendment 11 has been selected for separate decision. I call Neil Duncan-Jordan to move the amendment formally.
I beg to move.
The question is that Amendment 11 be made. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye! Of the contrary, no. No! The lobby. Members should be seated. The question is as on the order paper. Many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes are Chris Hinchcliffe and Iqbal Mohammed, and tellers for the noes are Gerald Jones and Jen Kitchen. Order.
The ayes to the right, 85. The noes to the left, 238.
The ayes to the right, 85. The noes to the left, 238. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Page 18. I call the Minister to move amendments 46 to 70 formally.
Move formally.
The government amendments 46 to 70 be made. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Consideration. Completed third reading.
Now.
King's consent. Minister to move third reading. Minister Scandal.
I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time. Madam Deputy Speaker, this Labour government was elected on a mandate for change, to create more good jobs in every corner of the country, drive up living standards for working people and get our vital public services back on their feet. And delivering our plan for change means ensuring every single pound of taxpayers' money is wisely spent and goes to those in genuine need. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is what this legislation will help deliver, with the biggest ever crackdown on fraud against the public purse. It is unacceptable that the Conservative government allowed fraud against the public sector to spiral to £55 billion a year, including a staggering £7.4 billion a year on benefit fraud alone. And it is unforgivable that they failed to ensure the Public Sector Fraud Authority was fit for purpose, or to properly update the DWP's anti-fraud powers for 14 long years. When you think of all the new ways fraudsters and scam artists rip people off, including by using data and technology, this simply beggars belief. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, we say no more. Our bill updates the powers of the Public Sector Fraud Authority so it can effectively fight fraud across the public sector on behalf of government departments and public authorities. And it makes vital upgrades to the DWP's fraud powers too, with new powers to investigate fraud. So for the first time, our serious and organised crime investigators can apply to the court for a warrant to enter and search the premises of suspected fraudsters and seize evidence like computers and phones. Updated powers to gather information so we can compel third parties like airlines to give us information, and so we can require it to be delivered electronically so we can tackle fraud as quickly as possible. Our new eligibility verification measure, so we can get crucial data from banks and financial institutions to check if people are getting money they are not entitled to, like having more savings than the rules allow, or if they're fraudulently claiming benefits abroad when they should be living in the UK. The bill extends financial penalties to people who have fraudulently claimed any type of DWP payment, like grants and loans, not just benefits. And it gives us new powers to get money back from people who can pay but who have repeatedly failed to do so, bringing our powers in line with other parts of government like the Child Maintenance Service and HMRC. And all of this being done in a fair and proportionate way, with measures tightly defined in legislation, strong safeguards, independent oversight with annual reports to Parliament and codes of practice which we will bring forward at committee stage in the other place. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to thank my honourable friends, the Minister for Transformation and the Parliamentary Secretary for the Cabinet Office for steering the bill through its committee stage and report stage, supported by excellent civil servants and House of Commons staff. I'd also like to thank all members of the Public Bill Committee and from right across the House for their detailed questions and thoughtful scrutiny of the bill's measures. They have done this country a good service, because this bill provides us with the tools we need to tackle modern fraud in the benefit system and across the public sector, helping to save £1.5 billion over the next 5 years as part of the DWP's wider action to save a total of £9.6 billion from benefit fraud and error. Because people who work hard and play by the rules, people who depend on our public services and on vital benefits, they deserve to have trust and faith in the system, and they're rightly angry when they see people abuse it. And our message today is clear. If you knowingly defraud the benefit system or cheat our public services, whether you're a large or small company, a criminal gang or an individual, we will find you, we will stop you, and we will get our money back. This Labour government will restore trust and fairness in the system and ensure every pound of public money delivers for the British people and our country, and I commend this legislation to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time, and I call the Shadow Minister, Helen Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Every penny of taxpayers' money lost to fraud or error is money wasted. So we, on this side of the House, support many of the measures outlined in this bill, not least those that continue the hard work of my colleagues in the Department for Work and Pensions prior to the general election. The government has a responsibility to make sure every penny it raises in taxation is well spent. Not only is this fair to taxpayers who've worked hard to earn that money on welfare, it goes to a principle which quite simply must be at the heart of our system, that government support should go only to those who it is intended for. Every penny that doesn't undermines the entire system. It erodes public trust and support, and it puts support for some of the most vulnerable people in society at risk. That's why in government we did the groundwork for the sections of this bill which see banks helping to crack down on fraudsters, recognising that while the state should never be able to see what you spend your money on, it should be able to check whether you're entitled to the money you're claiming. And the amendments we have tabled to this bill today are constructive. So I am disappointed that the government has chosen not to support them. Videos from sick influencers are hard to avoid if you're searching online about benefits. But rather than giving you help to claim something you may need and should rightly receive, those videos tell people how to game the system. And we want taxpayers to get their money back, even if it's already been spent. Madam Deputy Speaker, why should we tolerate people using social media platforms to help others commit fraud, helping people cheat the tests which are there so support goes to those who need it? Why should someone who has committed fraud be able to keep their high-end television or luxury car just because they've spent their ill-gotten gains before the department gets to them? We're clear that both of those things should be tackled, but sadly, Labour have shown themselves to be on the side of the fraudsters instead. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said at the outset, we back the overall purpose of the bill and much of the content, but I hope that the Right Honourable Lady's colleagues in the other place will take note of the constructive approach we have taken and the arguments made, particularly those made so articulately by my honourable friend for South West Devon earlier today and in committee. And I look forward to seeing this bill improved between now and when it may become law.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many in that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That concludes that bit of business. I'll let the front bench. If colleagues are leaving the chamber, they must do so quietly and quickly.